Hello everyone, welcome to our presentation. I'm Phoebe Godfrey and I'll be presenting with an undergraduate student of mine, Emily Kaufman. The title of our presentation is The Domination of STEM-Based Solutions in Global Climate Activism, from University Campuses to COP24+, the Need for Intersectional Approaches and Practices. This is part of a larger project that Emily and I have been working on, and as stated in our abstract, our argument is looking at this question of the dominance of STEM in climate solutions and asking why is that. And so from COP to university campuses, to the media, to the streets around the world, over and over we see messaging that the solution lies in technology, images of windmills, solar panels, and that generally white, male, Western engineers, mathematicians, physicists are going to offer us the salvation that we seek without actually having to transform the values of our culture, the hierarchies of our culture, the oppressions of our culture. Although in a lot of placards that you see at a protest, you'll see system change, not climate change, or cultural change, not climate change. But beyond those placards, we don't see that happening on campus. We don't see that narrative happening at the climate summits, the COP meetings. We don't see that narrative happening in the streets, really. And so we've begun this research to kind of ask, why is that, and what are the results of that lack of emphasis on the cultural, social aspects of climate change. And we're going to explore some of our experiences and ideas as to how this all plays out.
Before we begin our presentation, we would like to take a moment just to recognize our positionalities, who we are, and how we relate to this research. We invite you to take 1 minute of your own time to reflect on your own positionality.
The theoretical lens that Emily and I are using is intersectionality, which probably most of you know was theorized, or a term theorized and developed by the work of Kimberly Crenshaw and then Patricia Hill Collins, as well as many others, to articulate the dual oppressions experienced most particularly by women of color, both as a person of color and as a woman, and realizing that these are not separate, and nor have they ever been, and nor are any identities actually separate, although when we theorize them, we tend to talk about women, blah, 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 or African Americans, da, 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 or Latinos, or Native Americans, or men, rather than looking at these as ongoing, fluid, dynamic identities that are intersecting, that are changing each other, and yet still are acting out based on systemic inequalities that are designed to ensure that certain identities have privilege, certain identities have oppression, and that certain identities have different privileges and different oppressions in different contexts. So in my own work, I worked with a sociologist, Denise Torres, and we edited a volume of collective writings called Systemic Crises of Global Climate Change, Intersections of Race, Class, Gender. And in that work, we further applied the concept of intersectionality to actual material experiences, to earth, to water, to fire, to air, using the ancient Greek elements. And so the relationship between your body and the environment then becomes shaped both by those identities and by the environment around which you are surrounded. So in Systemic Crises, Torres and I propose a concept of nature-blind intersectionality, which invites us to theorize not just our social identities and how they shape and inform our physical bodies, but also how those identities engage with the natural and social world around us, whether that's the woods or water or being in nature or being in an urban space, who belongs where, with the more recent issue of Birding While Black, or the idea of Flint, Michigan, and access to water by environmental racism. And so seeing these relationships in a much more intersectional and theoretical way. And so we like to think about them also using the work of Karen Bard as interactions that are co-constructing each other, and that climate change is a cultural crisis and thereby is cultural progenic as opposed to being anthropogenic. Certainly humans are causing climate change, but not all humans, not all cultures, not all humans have hierarchical values in relation to the desire to dominate nature. Particularly, most indigenous cultures recognize a more symbiotic relationship, and so intersectionality invites us to think about these relationships in a much more holographic way, which is another way that Torres and I came to think about intersectionality, as a holographic experience or process. And just to end, there's a lovely little pagan song that goes, "Earth my body, water my blood, air my breath, and fire my spirit." So recognizing both the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, and our relationship to the physical world.
The following graphic shows the intersecting axis of privilege, domination, and oppression, and how they are interchangeable. Before I, Emily, reflect on my own experience in environmental activism, I would like to distinguish a difference of what I've seen using an intersectional lens. Masculine activism utilizes STEM solutions, is generally led by white males, and offers a global north capitalistic and generally disconnected from the environment lens. This is versus a feminine form of activism, which utilizes the humanities, social sciences, emotions, is generally led by the global south, and collaborative and more connected to the environment. It is important to recognize these distinctions as we go through the rest of this presentation. First, I'm going to discuss my experience as a UConn Fellow at the UN COP24 conference. The picture on the left was taken at a Greenpeace side event where activists and politicians were asked to draw how they feel climate change. The second picture was taken at the main conference pavilion, generally where more higher-up officials have access to. Instinctually, which photo do you see as more official? Which seems to be a better approach to creating climate change solutions? I took away a lot from the COP24 conference, however in a much different way than I expected. There was often talk about structural change, but the conference was still led through a white male Eurocentric perspective. There were side events utilizing small roundtable discussions, but these were not formal COP events. They were put on by a separate private entity, or in this case, Greenpeace. The professors I went to with often encourage us to go to the more high-profile events that discuss clean energy and solutions that worked within the normative capitalist structures, rather than going to the more spiritual events that introduce radically different intersectional and creative ways of approaching solutions. This distinctly shows the binary between the masculine or more white male STEM way of looking at climate change solutions versus the less valued feminine way of looking at climate change solutions. In 2019, I was an organizer of a climate strike in protest of UConn's investment in fossil fuels through the organization UConn's Fridays for Future. This organization was most productive when it was led by a small group, mostly females, focused on including a diversity of voices and in collaborating with administrators. We hosted a successful event where the speakers covered a variety of topics relating to environmental justice, and we were able to form a committee to consult with the president on how to make UConn more sustainable. Soon, however, the organization expanded. Members, mostly male-led, started moving the group in the direction of using combative techniques to create change. They demanded firm solutions relating to STEM and statistics. They claimed they wanted structural change, but they disregarded intergroup relations and the inclusion of diverse voices using an intersectional lens. A demand sheet for the university was created, but less glamorous quote-unquote solutions, such as encouraging students to reconnect with the environment and confronting structural inequities, were not listed. The more masculine, using the intersectional lens I discussed before, members isolated others and caused anxiety through splitting us up by race and gender rather than bringing the different threads together. This had the opposite effect and was less productive. I've also been involved in several councils created by the University of Connecticut to address environmental issues. UConn has been recognized as a nationally ranked sustainable school. However, my own experience has shown me that this is a very narrow, quote-unquote, masculine way of looking at sustainability. While UConn is excellent on regulations pertaining to energy, such as LEED certifications, we are still excluding different voices from the table who must be recognized. Each of the councils I have been on have been dominated by white males in the STEM field. When we apply a sociological intersectional lens, we need to ask ourselves why racism, sexism, and hierarchical education are not included in our definition of sustainability. Institutions like UConn repeatedly reinforce white masculinity while claiming to be saving the world. Because this definition of sustainability is so narrow, we remain stagnant and ineffective. As an activist committed to addressing social inequality in the climate change effort, I experienced a great deal of activism burnout and emotional labor. I experienced the greatest relief to my burnout when I engaged in more collaborative, justice-based activism, which focused on creativity, empathy, and collaboration. I have found that these organizations also foster the most effective change. The most important takeaway that we want you to take away from this presentation is that although in the everyday media and through many of our platforms, the most normative and dominant solutions proposed to climate change are STEM and those working around capitalism paradigms, this is not the solution. Many of the spaces I have entered are still dominated by white men or people who embrace more combative solutions. However, these don't work. Bringing an intersectional lens to my activism experiences, I've come to see the difference it makes in how I feel and how effective I can be. We need more creativity, empathy, and reconnection with ourselves, each other, and the environment. Climate activism needs to begin with intersectional equity and justice rather than ending with it. Please reflect on these final quotes that Phoebe and I have found that sum up our argument. We would both like to thank you for listening, and we would love your feedback. This research is ongoing, so please feel free to reach out to both of us if you have any questions or would like to participate in our research. We would also like to thank UConn and the Office for Undergraduate Research.